Hello and welcome to an introduction to Fasd. My name's Robin Smith and I'm the National Telephone Helpline Manager for NOFASD Australia. I'm joined here today by Bianca.
Hi everybody, I'm Bianca. I am a Project Support Officer for NOFASD and I'll be looking forward to co-hosting with Robin and Charlene today.
Thank you, Bianca. And Charlene.
Thanks, Robin. Hi everyone, I'm Charlene. I'm the Project Support and Governance Officer for NOFASD Australia. I'll be looking after your questions during the webinar, so please type them into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. As we may not have time to answer all your questions during the webinar, we will be sending out a document with the answers to those questions after the webinar, along with the link to the webinar recording. Thanks, Robin.
Thank you, Charlene. And I will let you know as well, this introduction to Fasd is being recorded and it will be available on our website from Monday the 13th of September to Monday the 20th of September for 1 week, just in case anyone has to leave early or if anyone wants to go back and have a look at any information that we are providing here today. I will just let you know as well that we do have I'm from WA and we do have a little bit of iffy weather over here at the moment. So just in case my internet drops out, please stay where you are and I will be back in very quickly. NOFASD Australia acknowledges and pays respects to the past, present and future traditional custodians and elders of this nation and the continuation of cultural, spiritual and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Just a little bit about the National Organisation of Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder. As much as I'd like to say we stood for NOFASD, and I'd love to say there is NOFASD, we are the National Organisation of Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder. We were founded in 1999 by Sue Myers, who decided her and her husband fostered a little girl. And this little girl was totally different to all her other children. And she wasn't meeting her milestones, like the developmental milestones like her other children. And things just weren't quite right with her. She did things such as go and touch a hot stove. Now, most children would do that once, maybe twice, just to double check, but then they think, oh, this is going to burn me, I'm not doing that again. This little girl didn't learn from that, and they had to put interventions in to stop her going near the stoves rather than her realising, gee, if I touch that, it burns. So Sue looked into it and she did a lot of research, and at that stage Fasd wasn't known about in Australia, and she had to go to Canada and she ended up getting a diagnosis of what was known then as Fasd, which is Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder. In 2016, we got some new guidelines. So now we do have, it is Fasd, Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder. So today we're just going to have a look at the description and prevalence of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. We're going to have a brief look at the diagnostic process. We're going to have a look at the impacts on the individuals and families, some of the communication and learning, and a few strategies, sensory strategies and support. So in this 2 hours, we'll be covering quite a lot of information. So the description and prevalence of Fasd. What is Fasd? Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is the term that we use to describe the physical and or the neurodevelopmental disorder that can result from prenatal alcohol exposure. Fasd is caused by alcohol consumption during pregnancy, and it is a teratogen, a poison, and it's an agent that is known to cause birth defects and permanent brain damage to the fetus at any stage through the pregnancy. Alcohol is a substance that can harm at any stage. So to explain it a little bit better than what I can, I'm just going to share with you this little video clip.
We would like you to note 3 core messages when considering prenatal alcohol exposure and the process of brain development. First, that alcohol is a teratogen. Second, that the brain grows from bottom to top. And third, because of the way the brain grows, some regions are more impacted by alcohol than others. We will explain each of these 3 core messages further. Alcohol is a teratogen, which means 2 things. 1, that alcohol can cross the placental barrier, and 2, alcohol is capable of interfering with the development of the growing embryo and fetus. Although exact amounts of alcohol exposure needed to impact the developing brain are unknown, exposure to alcohol during pregnancy can impact development and can lead to a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. It is the pattern of injury to the developing brain and the resultant impact on function that will be considered in the course of this and the following modules. The brain grows from bottom to top. It begins as a tube, and it is from this tube that brain cells move upward and outward to gradually build the brain. Another way to think about brain growth is that it is like a cauliflower. Beginning with the stem, the brain grows upward and outward. To support the way the brain grows, first glial cells, the support cells of the brain, begin to move upward and outward, branching off from the tube, essentially forming scaffolding that supports the movement of the brain cells. The brain cells, called neurons, climb up the scaffolding, moving to a specified location, and in some cases, replicating to form more neurons. Some neurons have a short journey, others have a long journey. When alcohol is introduced to the process of brain growth, it may disrupt the cells in many ways, damaging the basic scaffolding, confusing the neurons so they are unsure of where they need to go, and/or killing the neurons themselves. Which specific neurons are impacted depends on the timing and the amount of alcohol exposure. Consequently, the impact to the developing brain is diverse and scattered. Because damage is so variable, it is difficult to predict what challenges a specific individual with an FASD may face, and it is important to remember that understanding one individual may not provide insight into another individual with an FASD. Similarly, what may be a useful support to one person may not work with another. As a result of the variable pattern of impact caused by prenatal alcohol exposure, it becomes crucial that we are able to respond to the needs of each individual in a flexible, adaptive way. A recipe card approach will not be effective.
Yes, I think that's something that's very important to keep in mind. As much as I'd love to be able to say, if you're working with an individual that has FASD, that we can do this, this, and this, it will work. Because it might work for one individual, but then it might not work for another individual that has FASD. So we can see here where we have 1 billion neurons. This is what we're born with. And then those neurons go into neuro pathways and neural networks. And this is what is damaged at the time during alcohol consumption. So we can see here the gestation cycle and the critical periods of fetal development here. So for the first 2 weeks in here, week 1 to 2, it's before the little blastocysts attaches to the uterine wall. So in that period of time, there is no organ development or brain happening there. But you can see right from the end of week 2, going right through the pregnancies. You can see here in the red is the critical stages of development that is happening there. But you can see the orange is still sensitive right the way through the pregnancy. So you can see there that brain damage, if alcohol is consumed in any of these periods, it can harm the child. And we can see there where you can get both the physical and the neurodevelopmental, because this is where the heart, the arms, eyes, legs, teeth, mouth, ears, and genitalia are being formed. It is varying impact of prenatal alcohol exposure, though. There is many factors to keep in mind. One is the maternal, which is the metabolism of the woman. So everyone metabolises alcohol in a different way, some very quickly, others not so quickly. So if the woman has a very fast metabolic rate, it means the fetus is not exposed as long to the alcohol. We have the nutrition. As we do all know, during pregnancies, nutrition is very, very important. And the placental health as well, whether the baby's getting enough oxygen. The epigenetics of the mother and the age. There is another one there that is not, another factor that's not in there that is very, very important though, is stress. Because stress gives off a toxin as well, cortisol. And with that, combined with the alcohol, which is a teratogen, it has a double whammy on the fetus. So with the fetal, we have the susceptibility and the epigenetics. And the epigenetics are extremely important. There was a research done over in America where a researcher was studying twins. And this particular set of twins, their mother had 1 glass of wine each night over her pregnancy. She had no more, but there was just 1 glass of wine. When the twins were born, one baby had Fasd and the other didn't. So it brings up a lot of other things there into, okay, what affects one may not affect the other. And then, of course, we have dose, timing and frequency. So naturally, the more alcohol consumed, the more likely damage is to have occurred. The timing of how and frequency. So maybe a glass of wine over lunchtime and 1 over dinner is not quite as bad as having 2 over dinner. So how do you think that Fasd compares? What do you think is the prevalence there between Fasd, autism, spina bifida, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome and SIDS combined? Just have a quick think about it and think, just which would you say? It actually is that more individuals are affected with Fasd than with autism, spina bifida, cerebral palsy and Down syndrome and SIDS combined. This is not diagnosed cases, but it is where we have estimations, and I'll show you how we get that. There has been only 2 prevalence studies done in Australia, and they were the specialist population study that was done up at the Fitzroy Crossing, where the Aboriginal elder women, led by June Oscar, were looking after their grandchildren. And they were looking at these children and saying, these children are so different to our children. Their grandchildren were so different to their children. And why? Why is that? What's wrong? So they invited Telethon Institute to come up and the researchers there to do a study and work out why. And it was found that 12% of the population in Fitzroy Crossing had fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. The other population study was done also in WA, and that was in the Banksia Hill Juvenile Detention Centre for 10 to 18-year-olds. And it came out there that 36% of individuals there had fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. There was another 9% there, and when we have a look at the diagnosis, you'll get a little bit more of an idea there, but they had no prenatal alcohol exposure confirmed. So that could have been as high as 45% of those individuals had Fasd. So there was a study done in Canada in 2018 and a prevalence study done for fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And it came out there that 4% of the Canadian population had fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So just going back here, having a look at this graph and the alcohol consumption per capita in Australia compared to Canada. So we are quite a bit higher. So you can say, I think we can safely estimate that if Canada had a 4% prevalence of Fasd, Australia would certainly have a 4%. And it is a community responsibility. Drinking patterns of fathers and community impact on maternal use plays a huge part. They say there that 38% of Australian women will be less likely to drink alcohol if their partner or spouse encouraged them to cut back or stop drinking during their pregnancy. And 30% would cease drinking if their partner stopped drinking completely. So we're not sure at the moment. There is some study happening, but there's no confirmation at present that the male sperm can cause fetal alcohol spectrum disorder on conception. But we do know that alcohol does affect the male sperm. And so we do encourage as well for the fathers to stop their drinking when they're planning pregnancy. Fasd is not the result of an uncaring act. No one intentionally tries to harm their child, and no one wants to cause Fasd on purpose. There is no blame. We can see also that 50% of Australian pregnancies are unplanned, and often the woman may be 6 to 8 weeks pregnant before she finds out she's pregnant, in which time damage can have occurred. We can also see there that 59% of Australian women drank at some point during their pregnancy, and it's estimated that 1 in 13 alcohol-exposed pregnancies result in Fasd. I actually think that's a really important thing to look at and keep in mind, because when you look at that, it is like not every alcohol-exposed pregnancy results in Fasd. So I might say, oh, my mother drank when she was pregnant with me and I'm fine, which might be debatable by a few people, but I might be okay. I might seem to be okay. But my mother might have consumed alcohol with her friend and had exactly the same amount, and her friend's baby had Fasd. So we can see there, like the twin study that I was saying, it is a little bit like playing Russian roulette with your baby. So not every alcohol-exposed pregnancy results in Fasd. So the Australian diagnostic guidelines state that any confirmed alcohol use in pregnancy is sufficient evidence for fulfilling the exposure criteria for the diagnosis of Fasd. As going back to the twin study, we can see that the effect that exactly the same amount of alcohol had on one child and not on the other. So I'm now going to hand you over to Bianca, who is going to take you through the diagnostic process.
Thank you, Robin. So 83% of individuals with Fasd do not display the sentinel facial features. And there's a lot of confusion around the diagnosis of Fasd. And here we have a photo of an Hispanic child with displaying the 3 sentinel facial features of Fasd. And as you can see, the areas most affected are the eyes and the middle of the face. The prenatal alcohol exposure is also thought to affect the size and the shape of their face. And a range of facial anomalies develop and occur as a result of alcohol exposure on just 3 days out of the whole pregnancy, which occur on days 17 to 20. The 3 sentinel features, which you can see here, are the eyes, with the distance between the arrows A and B being a lot smaller than someone without this feature. And the smooth philtrum, which are the little grooves just at the top of your lip, and a thinner and smaller volume of the upper lip. The chart on the right-hand side of the photo here is used during the assessments with the diagnostic criteria requiring the philtrum and the upper lip to have a ranking of between 4 and 5. So this table describes the diagnostic criteria required for a diagnosis of Fasd from the Australian Guide to the Diagnosis of Fasd, which was released in 2016. And a diagnosis of Fasd can be made with or without the facial features. In the left-hand column, for a diagnosis of Fasd with the 3 sentinel facial features, the prenatal alcohol exposure does not need to be confirmed. The individual needs to have severe impairment in at least 3 out of the 10 neurodevelopmental domains, plus the presence of the 3 sentinel facial features. Moving over to the right-hand column, we have the criteria for the diagnosis of Fasd with less than 3 sentinel facial features. So with this, the prenatal alcohol exposure needs to be confirmed. The individual has the severe impairments in at least 3 of the 10 neurodevelopmental domains, and there is a presence of either none, 1 or the 2 of the sentinel facial features. So the neurodevelopmental domains that we just mentioned is also in the diagnostic criteria, requires the impairment in 3 of the following domains. So we have the brain structure and the neurology, the motor skills, the cognition, language, and academic achievement. And the academic achievement is something that's not usually picked up on or noticed until the child reaches school age. And generally, teachers' aides, anybody working with a child, tend to observe the developmental delays with learning. Sometimes parents may have an awareness, sometimes they may not have an awareness of their child's developmental delays. And if they do, they may feel that their child is just a bit immature for their age and will catch up when they are in school full time. So the next 5 remaining domains are the memory, the attention, executive functions such as impulse control and hyperactivity, affect regulation, which is an individual's overall ability to control their emotions, and the last domain is adaptive behaviours such as their social skills and communications. The assessment of adaptive behaviours is really essential because just as it assists with identifying behavioural deficits, it can help identify their strengths as well. So the neurodevelopmental domains generally involve a multidisciplinary team. So this table shows which medical and allied health professionals conduct assessments for each domain. For the brain structure and the neurology, a paediatrician is required, and they will also have to diagnose for the sentinel facial features. For the motor skills, a doctor, psychologist, and an occupational therapist. For cognition is a psychologist, the language, a speech pathologist, and also a psychologist assesses for the remaining 6 domains of the academic achievement, the memory, attention, executive functioning, affect regulation, and the adaptive behaviour and social skills. And an occupational therapist is also recommended for a sensory profile. So with misdiagnosis and co-diagnosis, many people with Fasd can also be diagnosed with the following disorders of autism, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, the reactive attachment disorder, conduct disorder, and oppositional defiant disorder. So the benefits, we're going to move into the benefits of diagnosing, and a parent of a person with Fasd once described their life before diagnosis being similar to floating around and being lost in space with no real direction or strategies to help them navigate their journey or their daughter's journey. But after receiving the diagnosis, it was very much like being given a roadmap with directions for their Fasd journey. And a correct diagnosis means that we can actually help individuals with Fasd and their families. So the benefits of diagnosis range across from being able to access Fasd-specific clinicians and services, the reduce the incorrect prescription of medication, and brings about an awareness to the advocacy, the need for the advocacy of individuals can't, not won't. So stigma and diagnosis, here we go, sorry about that. Here we've got a short video from Miles Himmelrich, who is an adult living with Fasd, which talks about some of the stigmatisations and labels.
I wrote this down last night, and what I wanted to do was kind of put these labels, because these and many other things were labels that people would give me throughout my life. This is how they would see me. Sometimes these were labels that people gave me, whether it's teachers or parents. Sometimes these were labels I even gave myself. I'm not good enough. I'm not trying hard enough. Nobody likes me. And these were labels that I thought, well, I guess that's what defines me. This is what makes me who I am. And it was difficult because I believed inside myself that I was more than this. But when you're told things like, you're not trying, you're not paying attention, you don't care, and the results show those things, you start to believe maybe, just maybe, that's true. They look at me and try to define me. Lazy, doesn't try hard enough, doesn't pay attention. This is how they labeled me. Learning disabled, special needs, this is how they diagnosed me. Take them away. Don't place them on me. Am I not more than a label? Am I not more than a diagnosis? But if you diagnose me, but if you must diagnose me, then go ahead. Go ahead. Diagnose me with FASD. Faith, ability, strength, and determination. And if you must label me, then go ahead. Go ahead. Label me with presenter, trainer, researcher. Now take another look at me and see how I've redefined me. Mentor, advocate, husband, father. That's who I am. If we can start to look and understand FASD and get to a point where I knew I had potential and I knew I could succeed, I just needed people to change their view of what potential and success was. I was never going to finish grade 12 and go off and be an architect or an accountant because I'm not good at math. But what am I good at? I can go up and help people see and understand FASD differently. For so long, I looked at my brain and I hated it. It didn't work like everybody else's. And now, I look at my brain and I love it because it doesn't work like everybody else's. I've embraced me. I have FASD, I'm not FASD. I am so much more than that. I need people to understand what the FASD is, how to support me with that, and some of that means you're going to have to talk to me and hear what supports I need and what's going to work and what's not going to work. But understand, I need to find success for me. Redefining what success is. Then, and only then, you'll truly see that individual succeeding. Thank you.
So the changes in brain development are permanent with Fasd. The brain will not and does not repair itself over time. However, people with Fasd are able to learn differently, but they are able to learn. And having the appropriate supports have a huge impact on learning and life outcomes. Impacts of trauma. These charts show quite clearly the differences of how trauma affects the typical development of children and adolescents, as opposed to those without traumatic exposure and experiences. And as we can see on the left-hand columns there, the typical development chart, the largest tiers are the cognitive, social and emotional development. Whereas if you look to the bottom tier of the chart on the right, it shows that through experiencing traumas, the biggest part of their development is taken up just on the survival responses of the psychological distress, which can limit capacity for development in other areas. And using a trauma-informed approach and practices helps to reduce the potential for re-traumatisation of individuals with Fasd and the vicarious trauma also experienced by parents, families, caregivers, educators and teachers. So here we can see how Fasd and trauma overlap each other, with the behaviours intertwining there of the disorganisation, the disengagement, sleeping difficulties, and the symptoms of anxiety and depression which can come through. And also the concentration and learning difficulties through being easily distracted from hyperactivity, and also the poor short-term memories. The takeaway message here that can be found is that the biggest difference between Fasd and trauma is that Fasd is a lifelong disability, whereas trauma can be recovered from successfully with the right supports and environments. So before I hand you back over to Robin for a while, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to place them in the chat box for Charlene to share with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Bianca. And Charlene, do we have any questions?
We do. Thanks, Robin. The first question is, will the slides be shared?
They will be available on the website for 1 week only, but I'm afraid they won't be shared. We do have some information on the website, very similar to what we've got here.
Okay. And what about the level and rate of drinking? Is the correlation the likelihood of Fasd?
Yes, definitely there is. The more alcohol consumed, the more chance there is. But as I say, we just don't, there's so many things we do not know, and so much research that still needs to be done. But when you think about it too, it's very hard for research because it's very unethical to ask a woman, well, we can't. We know alcohol can affect the child at any time. So we don't want to be asking women to consume alcohol to do a study. So it is done through rats and mice. So it does take a little bit longer just to find these things out as well.
Okay. And is there a service that can assist in having adults assessed with Fasd?
That's a very good question. Adult diagnosis is quite different, and it is a little bit harder, often because the individual has learned to grow out it's learned to talk the talk, if you would like to say, but it still can be done, and it would depend on what you would like the diagnosis for. So I have had adults assessed and got a diagnosis through genetics. Now, genetics, there is no blood test to say, yes, that you can, that is Fasd. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. But what genetics can do is they can rule everything else out. So they can rule everything else, and as long as there's prenatal alcohol exposure confirmed or sentinel facial features, and I've even had one adult diagnosed because often the individuals will grow out of the facial features as they get older. And I've had one adult diagnosed through photographs of when he was a child. The geneticist was able to see quite clearly the facial features. But in saying that, that gives you no NDIS support. So it depends on what you want the diagnosis for. Sometimes individuals just like the confirmation of knowing that I'm not dumb and stupid, that I do have a brain impairment. And so it depends on what. Otherwise, I would suggest that you get in contact through the website, and I can give you more specific information because each state is a little bit different.
Okay. I have been trying to get a Fasd diagnosis for 3 years in Tasmania. Is there anywhere else I can go to get this?
Yes, unfortunately, that is a common problem. If you can contact me through the website, I can give you some other options. The one good thing that's come out of COVID is that some places are doing telehealth now. So yes, please get in contact with me via that, and I will be able to give you some more specific information.
Is the exposure purely ethanol? Many communities we work with use methylated spirits as the form of alcohol, and wondering if they have the same effect.
Yeah, good question. Very good question. And it will definitely have an effect, definitely. But with Fasd, it is purely alcohol. So that is, but I guess in that case as well, what will happen is the alcohol exposure would be confirmed, because if they could get hold of alcohol, they would be having alcohol instead of the other toxins.
Okay. And can you just confirm what you said about the trauma approach in supporting children and people with Fasd? Or is this approach, or does this approach doesn't work?
Trauma approach is very, it does, and as Bianca said, it overlaps and crosses over quite a number of issues. What the big difference with trauma is, it is something that the individual can get over. So it depends on the background. Not every child with Fasd has trauma in their background, but there does tend to be quite a few that do. So a trauma will inform practice, or more looking like putting strategies for Fasd in is a better way of looking at it, because really trauma is a byproduct as well. So if we look at the primary, and we'll go into the primary and secondary conditions in a little while there. So hopefully keep watching and we'll cover some of that.
Okay, we'll leave the questions for now. I just wanted to remind everyone that if you do have any questions, if we don't get to any questions that you asked during the webinar, we will be sending out a document with the answers to those questions after the webinar when we send the recording. Okay. Thanks, Robin.
Thank you, Charlene. So the impact of Fasd. So the impact is poor growth. There can be physical abnormalities in the body or major organs, and often problems with vision and hearing. I don't know whether you can remember back to the gestation chart, but vision and hearing carried on right through the developmental stages. So individuals with Fasd, children and adults, often function socially and emotionally and mentally at a much younger developmental age than their chronological age. It's what we call dismaturity. Now, dismaturity is very, very complex. As a rough guide, we would say that these individuals are socially and emotionally about half their chronological age. So as Bianca said earlier, with academic achievement, it's often not picked up until the child goes to school. But because when the child goes to school, they may only be acting like a 3-year-old, because that's where they are socially and emotionally. So it's a very complex thing here, because you can have a look there. You can see the physical age of a individual with Fasd. They might be 18, but they have the expressive age of a 20-year-old, the reading ability of possibly a 16-year-old, living skills of an 11-year-old, and money and time concepts of an 8-year-old. So you can sort of see there how it's really hard too, because if this individual goes and gets a job, and because they're actually 18 years old and they have the expressive language of a 20-year-old, they can get by with their reading skills, but then it starts to become a little bit obvious to their work colleagues with their living skills, maybe, coming to work with the shirt hanging out, not having a shower, those sort of things. But then when they get their weekly wage, oh, you beauty, straight down to about JB Hi-Fi and blow the whole week's wages on games and leaving them nothing to live with for the rest of the week. And the social skills of a 7-year-old, so sort of moving away from their colleagues and peers as well. And with a comprehension and emotional maturity, might get very upset. You know, if someone says, oh, no, that's your work's not good enough, you need to redo it, they might stamp and have a meltdown. This I love this. It was said by an individual that's living with Fasd. It's like it's a very varied ability, and living each day with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is like living every day with a lamp with a short in it. Some days, really, really good. Oh, sorry, I just went through that a little bit too quick. Some days really good, some days sparking. And these days you can remember things. I think it's been very frustrating for a lot of parents sometimes that you might go over the thing. I know over and over the same thing. I know one parent was trying to teach his daughter the colour green, and she knew the grass was green and she knew the trees, leaves on the trees were green. And her school uniform was green. But when Dad asked her what colour was the uniform, it was always blue. So anyway, he'd go along each day, you know, what colour's the grass? It's green. What colour's the trees? It's green. What colour's your school uniform? Blue. And then one day she gets it. And it's just like wonderful. But the next day she might not. So sometimes they might be sparking on like, can do things in the morning but can't do them in the afternoon. And then there's some days that things just don't happen. I know a foster mum that has a 16-year-old and her parents live in South Australia. If he's having one of these bad days, she won't travel down to Adelaide. She will leave it until he's having a better day, because she knows that the trip would just be a disaster if he's got one of these days, that nothing's going to happen. So when working with a child who has or may have Fasd, consider reframing their behaviour as unintentional consequence of compromised brain function rather than willful defiance. It can sometimes be useful to reframe the behaviours with the question, is it the child that won't, or is it that the child can't? So we look at the primary versus the secondary behaviours, and what happens, and this is why we always advocate it is so much better to have an early diagnosis there, because often the secondary conditions can come in, and secondary conditions are reduced if there is early diagnosis, because the child knows that there is a brain impairment. So we can sort of see there that the challenges communicating with thoughts clearly. The secondary is frustration, so they just get very frustrated. Processing speed delays is like aggression and shutting down. I know we do like to say these poor individuals, kids with Fasd, are like 10-second kids living in a 1-second world. Everyone wants a response immediately, but they may have processing delays. So memory problems as well, giving to isolation, giving up, avoidance, difficulty in reading social cues, which leads to a lot of anxiety as well. It is very common for individuals with Fasd to have a lot of anxiety and difficulty interpreting abstract concepts, and they can be over-dependent on others and go to substance use sometimes. So difficulty remembering, speech and language disorders, and difficulty with reading comprehension, and often literacy and numeracy difficulties. How I like to describe it is with the perception and memory disorders. If you ask me a question, I would go up into this little room in my brain, and in there would be all these very neatly stacked filing cabinets, and they would be marked A to Z. And if I say you ask me where is Coles, I'd go to C, pull it out, get the directions, and be able to tell you basically straight away. So if you can imagine going into a room, this little room in the brain of an individual that has Fasd, the filing cabinets are more than likely to be strewn all over the place, files upended everywhere, and just a total mess. So when you ask them a question, they will need time to actually process and think about it. So we often have to give more time. We have difficulty distinguishing fiction and reality as well, and sometimes getting things mixed up, and which goes into then what we call confabulation. But what can happen is, say, last week, this individual with Fasd went down the beach with Uncle Bob and Auntie Mary, and they built a sandcastle. On the weekend, they went to the playground with their cousins and played on the swings. And then yesterday, they went to the movies with Mum and Dad. And you might ask, what did you do yesterday? And it could come out, oh, I was with Uncle Bob and Auntie Mary, and we played on the swings. Oh, and then we had an ice cream. And it's like, no, that didn't happen. But it's picking things out of their memory. So this is Nate Sheets now, just talking a little bit about confabulation.
No one likes a liar. When we think someone is lying to us, we may feel annoyed, insulted, or hurt. How could they think that we're dumb enough to believe their lie? Or maybe we feel betrayed, or perhaps we did believe what they told us, and now that we discovered that it wasn't true, we feel as if we've been manipulated. But here's the thing. Oftentimes what looks like a lie and sounds like a lie isn't a lie in the traditional use of the word. There could be multiple legitimate brain-based reasons you're getting information out of someone that's incorrect. Responding to them as if they're intentionally lying to you and punishing them is essentially punishing them for something that's out of their control, and that doesn't help anyone. In this video, we'll talk about one of the more common brain-based reasons that you may find yourself in a situation with someone who appears to be lying to you, but isn't. In fact, they could be doing something that all of our brains do: confabulation. I often work with people who have a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or FASD, but today we're going to learn about ideas that apply to everyone, regardless of whether or not they have a developmental disability. Confabulation happens when your brain fills in the blank as you're remembering something. Like I said, all of our brains do this filling in without us even knowing it. This is because our memories are imperfect, and so the brain lends us a hand by confabulating missing details. We don't know when we're confabulating because it feels as if we're accessing a normal, intact memory.
Yeah, I think that's so true too, in the respect, if you think about it, if say there's a robbery in a shop and there's 5 witnesses to that robbery, a policeman will go and get those 5 different statements, and every one of those will be slightly different to the others. So the impact on the individuals: poor judgment, a short attention span, and high levels of activity and impulsivity. So it affects the executive functioning, and the executive functioning is the ability to plan, organise, initiate, follow through, set goals, learn from experience, and control impulses, and often having problems following multiple directions or rules and understanding the concept of time. Difficulty with numeracy and abstract reasoning, and the inability to understand cause and effect, and difficulty organising tasks and material. Most people with Fasd do not learn from consequences or punishment. Many individuals with Fasd struggle with impulse control. This is Ricky here. He's an adult male, and he is going to let you know why, as much as he'd like to drive a car, he's decided that no, he can't.
I want to drive, but I can't because it's dangerous for me. Because what happens is if I drive, I might want to go my speed limit, and that would be not appropriate for the rest of the people, and I will get in trouble with that. I was driving along in a car with my mom, and I happened to see a stray dog. I wanted to get lucky. My mom caught me by the string of my thing because I opened the door, swing the door open, and I was about to go in the 4 lanes of the freeway, and my mom grabbed me just barely by the tip of her hands, or else I would have maybe got hit or something. That's the type of thing that I like to do. I don't think, I just do it. I don't want to be dragged going with places with my mom. You know, I want to be more independent, staying home. But it's not a seizure. It's not a seizure tick. It's not something I decide to do it. It just random comes. Don't know when it's gonna me to go out and do something instructive with somebody. I just do it.
Yes, it's the impulsivity. And when you think about it too, if you think about the dismaturity that we just went through, it's if you had an 18-year-old is able to go to the hotel and drink alcohol and can drive a car, but would you allow a 9-year-old to do that? And so this is where it becomes so very, very difficult, is we really need to look very much at the social and emotional age of these individuals rather than their chronological age. And that way gives supports to work with them. So we're just going to have a quick look now at sensory processing, which is the ability to take in information, filter it, pay attention to the important bits, organise, interpret and respond appropriately, which is an awful lot that we do all at once. I know years ago I used to live next to a railway crossing, and it had bells on it. So every time a train went past, the bells would go. And it wasn't until I had young children, because all young children are fascinated with trains. And when I had them over, they'd say, "Oh, train, train." And I'd think, "Oh, yes, there is." But I had completely put that into the background, and I actually didn't even hear them when they went off, because it was something that I just filtered out because it wasn't needed. I didn't need it. So individuals with FASD can be hypersensitive, or they can be hyposensitive to light, taste, touch, and smell. And they can have tactile defensiveness, not wanting to be touched, or conversely, a high need for tactile stimulation, such as cuddling or touching others. I do know there was one little girl, just to explain hyposensitivity, who her parents, she came from community, and her foster parents, when she first came down, took her to the dentist, because often individuals with FASD have problems with their teeth, and she had to have a tooth out. So they thought, oh, we'll teach her about the tooth fairy, which was lovely. So she put the tooth overnight, and next morning she got $5, which she thought, oh, this is really good. She was stoked. The only trouble is Mum went into the bathroom a couple of days later and found her with a safety pin actually trying to pick out the tooth. And there was blood everywhere, and she was obviously doing quite a bit of damage. Luckily, nothing permanent, but she couldn't feel it. She just could not feel that she was hyposensitive. Others I've heard of breaking arms and not feeling it for days because they just don't feel the pain and carry on with that. And then the hypersensitive, it can be to like not standing certain clothing, the touch of things. They might need tags taken out of the clothes, and the smell of things is very, very high for them. So due to auditory processing difficulties, children may not respond to traditional teaching methods. They may act out in frustration because they do not understand, and they may melt down due to sensory overload and may fidget a lot. And it has been recorded that 80% of individuals that have FASD do have sensory processing issues. So I don't know if anyone's seen this, but I think this is a great little video that I'm going to play in a minute here that has it gives you an idea of what it is like for an individual that has sensory overload and what the sounds feel like to them. I think that's really a good one, just to have a look at what someone that can't filter out these noises has to go through daily. Also, going back to that analogy that we had on the light globe, it is worse on those days that they have no light on at all. They're the days that often sensory issues play a bigger impact. And if they're having a really good day, not so much of an impact. So I'm now going to hand you over to Bianca, who's going to take you through some social skills.
Thanks, Robin. So children with Fasd typically lack social skills such as the listening, asking for help, waiting their turns and sharing. And children with Fasd often have trouble making and keeping friends due to being that less developmentally mature, their poor impulse control, their learning difficulties and having troubles of, they don't understand the subtleties of relationships, which can lead to them having poor peer relationships and social isolation. And they may prefer to play with younger children, which is quite a common occurrence, but it also leaves them vulnerable to manipulation. So helping individuals with Fasd, I think we need to start with changing our understanding of how a person with Fasd thinks and feels and being able to help them understand their world. And we can do that through changing our thinking from seeing a person who won't do something to understanding that they can't do something. And when it is appearing as though they don't care or seeing them shut down, we need to understand that they may not be able to identify their feelings or show their feelings. When it appears that they're just trying to get attention, and to just realising that maybe they need some more physical contact or some extra cognitive supports. And when we see them acting younger, this is because they are developmentally younger, and the considerations will need to be made for the dismaturity experienced by people living with Fasd. So we need to go from seeing the person as a thief to understanding that some people with Fasd do not understand ownership. If they see something they want, they take it, and basically they think it's there for everybody and anybody to use. And more often than not, they just forget to put the items back. These items can range from toys, electronic devices, phones, food and drink, through to the more serious items such as money, jewellery, bikes and cars. So what we see is them not trying to understand what is obvious to us. It may be something that needs to be retaught repeatedly to them. And the last one there, we may see a fussy and demanding child, adolescent or adult, but they may be feeling oversensitive and possibly experiencing that sensory overwhelm that Robin was just explaining. We have the 8 essentials to success, and an important thing to remember when working with or supporting people with FASD is that we need to be supporting them at their developmental age, not where their chronological age says they should be. And the structure and the routine is the glue that makes the world make more sense for a person with FASD. So the first one is consistency. Generalising learning from one situation to another is often a challenge. They need minimal environmental changes that work best, and this includes language also, the shared phrases, words and instructions. And a short story that describes this best is there was a young student with FASD who was very good at maths, but when she changed schools, she simply stopped being able to do simple arithmetic and sums. So her mum did some investigating and eventually worked out that the schools wrote the numeral 4 differently. As we know, you can write the number 4 two ways, either with a closed top or an open top. So the young girl didn't make the connection that these two numbers were the same. And so she stopped being able to understand the sums that were in front of her. Once this issue had been identified, the problem had been solved and the student was once again able to start doing maths quite comfortably and confidently. Communication strategies, concrete. We use the term concrete where we try not to use words with double meanings, idioms. For example, the cat's got your tongue. They may think that the cat literally will get their tongue, and where possible, it's important to show them how to do something rather than just tell them how to do something. Specific, which means we need to say exactly what you mean. So following on from the last slide, there's a great example of saying this slide here to say exactly what you mean. So many individuals with FASD would see this sign and take it quite literally. They would look for and get some paper and a pen and begin drawing the bridge ahead of them, because that's what their interpretation is of what the sign is telling them to do. So the next video here we have starring the famous Ronnie Corbett. It's just a little bit of light and bright to break things up a little bit, but the message is quite a good one. It shows just how difficult it is when you don't understand the variations in the English language. So there is a note to this, just quickly before it starts. For one of the parts in the skit, for anyone who doesn't know, it's not very common knowledge in Australia, I guess, it will be helpful to keep in mind that in England, Orange is the name of a telecommunications network service provider, similar to Telstra or Optus. Thanks, Robin.
I bought something from you last week and I'm very disappointed.
Oh, yeah? What's the problem?
Yeah, well, my BlackBerry is not working.
What's the matter? Run out of juice?
No, it's completely frozen.
Oh, yeah, I can see that. I'll tell you what. Let's try it on Orange.
That's got a few black spots, you see.
Oh, dear, yeah. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Was there anything I can do to get my BlackBerry working?
Well, it could be an application issue. But where do you store that BlackBerry?
Well, it's on my desktop.
Well, you could try using a mouse to drag the BlackBerry to the trash. Then after you've done that, you might want to launch the BlackBerry from the desktop.
Well, I've already tried that a few times. I mean, all it did was mess up Windows.
Well, Well, it might be worth waiting a couple of weeks. They got the latest blackberries coming in then.
Well, could you give me a date?
Certainly.
Let me put that date in my diary.
Anything else I can help you with?
Yes, I've also got a problem, to be honest, with my apple.
Oh dear, that is an old apple, isn't it?
Yeah.
When did you buy that?
Last week.
Last week? Oh, they brought out 2 new apples since then. What's the problem with it?
Well, I've tried to put my dongle in it, and it won't fit.
Oh, yeah. And how big's your dongle?
Well, I don't know much about these things, but my wife's seen a few dongles in her time. And she says it's a little bit on the small side.
Well, I'm afraid there's not a lot I can do about that. Tell you what, let me try booting it. No, it's crashed. Anything else I can help you with?
Well, funnily enough, yes, my grandson's birthday soon, you
yeah.
see. Now, he's already got an apple and a blackberry. I mean, have you got anything else that you might just like?
Oh, we're doing a special offer on these. I mean, I can't make head or tail of them, but the kids seem to like them.
Oh, yeah.
Xbox. 360.
So looking at some support strategies for the learning, education activities must be relevant to the individual and try to develop activities that are based on their strengths. Try alternative and accommodating environments to adapt to their sensory needs and learning needs. And we also remember to use lots of praise and encouragement. Support strategies such as visuals help to increase the predictability of their environment and what's coming next. They support the verbal instructions they're receiving, helps with creating boundaries, and it assists to increase their independence and supports transitions or changes in their routines. So the first and then cards, they indicate very simple steps, and it creates a visual reminder of the steps they need. And it also allows time for processing and providing clues. And if the child or the adult is using the PET cards at home, ask the parents and the carers if they could maybe provide them, so you can create copies of similar images to provide the continuity of learning and the consistency. And it's also really important to remember the consistency of language for effective communications, and to have an awareness that the person you're working with or supporting might use completely different terminology at home. For example, at home, they might use the word toilet, whereas at school or in the community, it's maybe known as just the bathroom. So that can cause quite a lot of confusion. So it's important to include a finished concept in your visuals, and on the left here, when each task is complete, it can be moved across or down into the right-hand strip of the Velcro, or in the second image, as each task is completed, it can be dropped into the bottom of the basket. Another good idea is you could use photos, individual photos of the person completing the tasks also. So using a paper chain is a great strategy for helping to see time. For example, during transitions from one example to the next, for each minute that passes, remove one link from the chain so that they have a visual of time decreasing and how much time or links they have left to complete packing up or putting on their shoes on, for example. Breaking down the tasks into individual tasks to make them achievable is also another great strategy for assisting a person with Fasd to complete the tasks as shown here on the left image for, literacy activities. On the right-hand side image, using a simple task sheet is a great asset for helping them to understand the individual steps required through the process to complete the task. So using visual social stories can also be an important strategy for supporting activities involving social learning and assisting with the development of relationships with their peers. It's also important to remember to recognise when they have demonstrated an increased capacity of understanding that self-regulation of their emotions and behaviours socially, because it is an achievement, and acknowledge their effort and their growth in developing that sense of emotional well-being and social responsibility. Hands-on, this is great for tactile learners. So to help with learning structured routines or activities, we need to rehearse, just like we would with a fire drill or an evacuation. We need to ask the individual to repeat or paraphrase, and this is great for the tactile learners, is finding props to tell a story or act as a memory prompt. They can actually use them as well. That also increases memory retention. So when things are not working with an individual with Fasd, it's confusing and the intervention is not working, the strategies that you've put into place, we need to stop and have a look at what is going on. We need to ask them and listen to what they are trying to express. If they can't explain, offer them options to help with calming them down. For example, music, going for a walk, throwing a basketball. Maybe they just need some quiet time. Maybe they need some more information to complete the task. It's hard to remember that sometimes they are trying to make the right choices, and always offer encouragement for when they do make the right choice. There is not a one-size-fits-all approach with Fasd, and as each person with Fasd is different, depending on the areas of the brain that has been damaged. So for all of these strategies, it's a trial and error approach that will need modifications from time to time. And this also takes practice for everybody involved. So next we have here Nate Sheets offering some advice on unhelpful responses.
It really doesn't matter how much you love a person who's escalated but targeting you with their anger, or how often you've dealt with it in the past. It doesn't matter if they're a 6-year-old or a 26-year-old, or if they're your own child or someone else's. Even if you feel mostly calm, there are parts of your brain that you have no control over that respond because they sense a threat. In this video, we'll talk about how this brain response in ourselves makes it very, very easy to respond to an escalated person in an unhelpful or unproductive way. In past videos, we've talked about how making and practicing a proactive plan with a kid or adult with FASD can help them to emotionally regulate when a situation is actually happening around them. There's a lot of reasons that this can be helpful, but essentially it's because it helps to do a lot of the processing ahead of time, and it can be a shortcut to emotional regulation during stress. And we also mentioned that just as practicing these plans can help a child or an adult with a developmental disability, practicing the plans can help us for the exact same reasons. While it's easy to see how challenging behaviors that someone else is having target us during escalation, it's worth looking at how our responses can be challenging to the person that we think we're trying to help. So here's a quick list of common unhelpful responses that we tend to use during escalation. We frequently mention that, generally speaking, the less talking you do while a person is escalated, the better. Remember, people with FASDs often struggle to process what you're saying, even on a good day. During escalation, trying to reason with them is probably not going to work, because escalation lowers our cognitive skills. And this is not just an FASD thing, it applies to all of us. You're never in the middle of an argument with, say, a significant other, going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, when suddenly one of you says, "You know what, honey, you're absolutely right, I'm sorry." No, you have to separate or be quiet, take some time to calm down, gain your cognitive skills, and then perhaps one of you will begin to show flexibility and move forward in a more productive or calm way. The issue is, because we get escalated when we sense another person escalating, most of us will impulsively begin to try handling the situation verbally, especially if it's a low-level escalation. Even if you're trying to be nice, supportive, and flexible, talking is still talking, and what you're saying is probably not going to be fully processed or understood. Now, there may be times where you can't simply sit there and be quiet or separate yourself from the situation. So if you must talk, you have to be quiet for several seconds or minutes after you say whatever it is you're saying. But again, in these moments, our escalated brains tend to keep on talking and talking. Or if the person that we're addressing says something oppositional, like, "I'm not doing that," then we tend to immediately respond, maybe with annoyance or, again, by trying to reason with them. And that brings us to the next unhelpful response. In previous videos, I've encouraged you to not respond to immediate, impulsive, oppositional statements or behaviors. But here's the thing. You're going to want to. Oppositional behavior usually looks intentional, as if the person is choosing their words and as if they're in full control, but they're probably not. When someone is being oppositional, there's not a magical word or phrase that will dissolve the opposition. Thinking stops opposition and gets both parties to a point where they can move forward together. If we respond, even gently or calmly, we stop the thinking process. It's important to remember that many kids and adults with FASD struggle with correctly interpreting tones of voice when they're doing well. When they're escalated, they're definitely going to struggle interpreting these cues. Their brains may be ultra-sensitive to tones of voice or volume. If their brain thinks you're yelling at them, then they're going to respond as if they are. So if you must talk, make sure you use a soft and gentle volume and a nice tone of voice. In these moments, we may think that it's a good idea to clearly and calmly tell a person what the consequences will be if they don't stop a behavior. It feels like we're helping them to plan and to think. But if being quiet is an option, do that. Even a nicely worded FYI in regards to the consequences of their behavior can easily be interpreted by them as a threat, and it won't help the person if they're significantly escalated. So, how can we avoid these unhelpful responses? We already know the answer, by having a plan that we practice and that we follow in the moment. If all I have to say is, I'm following the plan, and the person knows what I'm talking about because we've talked about this plan and practiced it, that will help me to disengage much more easily. I can be quiet and allow them to think. Even if they respond with opposition, saying, I'm not following this stupid plan, it doesn't matter because we can keep following the plan. A quick side note, you need to remember to tell the person who you're supporting that you're going to be quiet when following the plan. If you don't make it clear to them that your part of the plan is to stay quiet, that can escalate them more in the moment. By practicing the plan with them and telling them what your responsibility is, that is to be quiet, even if they're escalated and following the plan, they should know that you're not ignoring them. So why is it important that we respond in ways that help the person calm down? Because our goal is to help them understand that we're there to support them, even through behaviors and escalation. The more we do that, the more likely they'll be to follow the plan themselves as time goes on. In other words, if we can have a plan that actually works, the person will be able to practice their emotional regulation and hopefully get quicker and better at it. I hope you found this video helpful.
Yes, so Nate there gives some really good tips there on what to do. And as he said then as well too, having a plan is very, very important. Often when individuals with FASD get escalated, it can mean that they are not controlling their emotions properly, and sometimes they cannot remember what they've done either, so it can go into a lot of like a meltdown there, which is the time to sort of, you need to leave it until they've calmed down. And as Nate said, get a plan in place. I know there was one foster father that when they first got their son, he had to get outside and he had to run. And so if he became overwhelmed, he'd straight out the front door and he'd run. He would run across roads. He wouldn't look. He just went. And of course, Dad was really worried about his safety and would just run behind him, shouting at him to come back and stop. You're going to kill yourself. You're not looking, crossing the roads, all of that. And he just kept running to try and get away from his father. And it turned out when they sat down to work out a plan, the plan was asking the boy what was wrong. He needed to get outside and he needed to go for a run. And that was his way of doing his affect regulation. He was able to regulate himself and get back to normal by doing the running. So the plan they decided to put in place was that you could go outside, run, because the backyard wasn't big enough. So he was allowed to go outside, but run around the block and not cross any roads whatsoever. And because he did this, it could be day or night, it didn't matter. The plan was that Dad would follow him about 10 metres behind, just for safety aspects of it. But Dad would not say anything and would not talk. And so the first few times it happened, poor Dad was left absolutely breathless. I think he had to sort of wait a couple of laps sometimes because his son kept running and running and running. But the more he got used to the plan and knew that he could do it, it would only take, once round the block and he was fine. He was regulated and he would go back to being regulated and being able to cope. So Fasd is a complex neuro and or physical disability. It can be different for everyone. This is why we call it an invisible disability quite often, because individuals with Fasd can just look like anyone else. You need to listen to a child's parent and carer because they know that child the best, and try to understand the child's developmental ages across the different domains. Focus on the strengths, and we need to change and adapt. So there's strengths. There's many individuals that have a lot of strengths. And I know personally this young boy who's a 16-year-old boy who loves photography, and his parents have set him up with Digital Journey Photography there. And that's a website that you can purchase photos off of. And he is an astounding young boy. And one of the things I will point out here as well is that many people may think that, if you have Fasd, you'll have a low IQ. That is not the case at all. And this particular young boy I know has an IQ of 120. And so in some ways that can create a whole heap of problems as well, because you'd have this want to get what you need to get what you want, and you have the capacity to work out very cunning ways to be able to do that and get that. And in the same token, he has his short-term and long-term memories are quite different. His long-term memory, because he loves birds. I know in the days before COVID, quite a while ago, I was over in Newcastle, and I'm from the West, and I walked along the beach there and I saw this bird I'd never seen before. And when I got home, I was talking to him on the phone and I said, I saw this bird I'd never seen. He said, describe it to me. And I described it, and he immediately said, that's a sooty oyster catcher. And I looked it up, and sure enough, it was. But this same boy that I'll ring and ask him, what have you been up to today? And he has to say, Mum, what have we been doing? And Mum, before she goes to bed at night, has to have a whiteboard and put out everything that's happening during the day, because his short-term memory, he cannot remember what's happening from 1 hour to another, which of course creates a lot of anxiety for these individuals as well. So some of the strengths can be very creative, very athletic, very generous, helpful and willing and friendly, good with hands and quite often with skilled trades. They can be very determined, hardworking and persistent, and very courageous and outspoken. So some of the things that we have on our website there too is very, very good for you to look through. We have a Fasd checklist. So this is in no way a screening tool. So we're not saying if you say yes to 50% of this, your child has Fasd. It is not at all. But NOFASD has developed this checklist because what has happened is the first point of call to getting a diagnosis is to go to the doctor, and the doctor will say, well, why do you think this child has Fasd? And there's 3 pages here of different things that can happen, and so you forget when, as a parent, if you're going in there, you forget quite a lot of the things. So this is just an extra list there that you can do a yes no to on what is there and hand over to the doctor. We have an introduction to teachers there, which I think is a great little introduction. And we have there, you can see over here, we have the Dismaturity, where the Dismaturity comes in as well. So there's a brief description there for the teacher. We have the Dismaturity there and the blank box down here. So you can put in where you think your child is socially and emotionally and at what stage with the different skills. Because as I say, it's quite different and unique for every individual that has Fasd. And we have some advice cards as well. So these are available through our website. And I think they are really, really important as well. Is we have the behaviour card, which says there that this is a brain disorder like autism, Fasd and acquired brain injury, not misbehaviour. The amount of times that I've heard parents going out and their child has a meltdown in the supermarket, and the unhelpful responses that that poor parent gets, like your child needs a slap on the backside, or you need to go and do a parenting course. And believe me, I know that any parent that has a child with Fasd has done more parenting courses than anyone else could imagine. And it is not that, it is because they're having a meltdown. So it explains there that my child is not misbehaving, my child has a brain disorder, and you are witnessing a meltdown. You may observe shouting, swearing, a repetitive verbal argument or phrase, or some other form of socially inappropriate behaviour, and saying that you're doing your best to handle the situation, and unless requested, they don't need any help. So, and there's also just a link to our website there. So if anyone's interested, they can find out more information. The other is our police information cards. It is very unfortunate that often getting up into teenage years, sometimes individuals with Fasd do come into the justice system or into the police, not necessarily just the justice, but they will be flagged by the police. And it is so unfortunate because these poor individuals, all they want to do is fit in. You can imagine if you're sitting in classroom in school right from a young age, and all your classmates around you, the teacher's asking a question and they're all putting their hands up to answer it. But because of your brain impairment, you have no idea what the teacher's asking about. No matter how hard you try, no matter how much you think about it, you can't get the answer to that question. So the last thing any of us ever want to do is look stupid. And all the individuals with Fasd just want to fit in and be like anyone else. So you're going to turn around and say, yes, I get it. Yep, I understand. And then the teacher may push and say, well, tell me the answer. So you're thinking then, oh my goodness, I haven't got a clue, but I don't want to show that to my classmates. So I'm just going to throw a book down or say I'm not going to tell you and just be cheeky. So I get myself thrown out of the classroom, which means I have won. I have done what I've wanted. I'd rather look like I'm naughty than look like I don't know, that I'm dumb and stupid. So my classmates think that, yeah, I do know I'm just being naughty. So that's fine. So at the very beginning, that there comes in that I just want to fit in. So being open to manipulation as well can happen. And so they can be conned into doing some things that really they wouldn't normally have done. But because this person says, oh, I'll be your friend if you go and pinch this movie out of the shop there. So they will do that. They will try and like to be, want to be fit in and be liked. So they can sometimes come into the police system and or in contact with the police, and the police might ask them if they had done a certain crime, and they'll think, oh yes, well, this police officer wants to hear yes that I did, so I'll tell him that yes I did, and quite often will embellish the situation to make it sound worse. So these information cards have your name and address, name and telephone number on, or the name of the person and a contact number that the police officer can contact if there is trouble. So we have parent support packs that are available to parents as well. So if you get a diagnosis, we can send out parent support packs there. Please go through our Contact Us on the helpline page. We do have other resources as well there, which is Diane Melbourne's resources, Trying Differently Rather Than Harder, which is a fantastic book. And we need to adjust our expectations here.
Again, this is the USS Montana requesting that you immediately divert your course 15 degrees to the north to avoid a collision. Over.
Please divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid collision.
This is Captain Hancock. You will divert your course. Over.
Negative, Captain. I'm not moving anything. Change your course. Over.
So, this is the USS Montana, the second largest vessel in the North Atlantic Fleet. You will change course 15 degrees north, or I will be forced to take measures to ensure the safety of this ship. Over.
This is a lighthouse, mate. It's your call. Hello?
I love that little clip there, because I think it shows how well these individuals are the lighthouse, and they are not going to change. We are the ones that have to change our expectations. So we have finished a little bit early, but I do believe we have a lot of questions, but I would really appreciate it if you wouldn't mind giving us some feedback on this segment as well. And I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with QR codes. All you need to do is put your camera up to this QR code on the screen there, and you will be taken straight to a link for SurveyMonkey. And so, Charlene, I think we do have some more questions there. Is that correct?
Yes, we do. Thank you, Robin. And I've also put the link to the SurveyMonkey questionnaire in the chat box as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have been getting quite a lot of conversation in the chat on this particular question.
Right, yes.
Is FASD recognised as a disability in schools?
Yes, unfortunately not. It is recognised, it depends on, and this is where it's a very sad fact, it depends on the IQ of the child, whether if it's less than 70, then they can get some support through the schools. But it is so frustrating. It's lucky now that the NDIS recognised Fasd as a disability, and because it is a lifelong disability as well, they can give supports in there. But unfortunately, the AMA, they acknowledge it, but they don't recognise it. And the reason for that is that it is a case that they say it's preventable, which I think is ridiculous personally, because often as we look there, the woman can be 6 to 8 weeks pregnant before she knows she's pregnant. So in there, the school, the NDIS can give funding for everything except in the actual classroom. So unless the child has another diagnosis, unfortunately, just for Fasd, they can't get an extra support in the education system, but we are advocating for that fully all the time.
At what age can you be diagnosed with Fasd?
Yeah, very, very good question. It can, there has been, I do know there has been times when babies have been diagnosed with Fasd because it's obvious that they do, which is fantastic. That is really optimal. But often it is not. They do say the best age to pick up is about 6 years of age. Sometimes prior to that, it is a little bit hard for the professionals to tell, but really the earlier the better there with that, because it's about knowing that the child has a brain impairment, and it's not willful behaviour, and it can be social immaturity, which is causing this child to play up. Because as you can imagine an 8-year-old in a schoolroom, the teacher wouldn't put up with the same behaviour from an 8-year-old as they would for a 4-year-old. But socially and emotionally, that's where this child might be. So it's about changing those perspectives and having a look. I will also say it never hurts to put in any strategies for fetal alcohol spectrum disorder either, no matter on what's wrong with your child. That will not affect at all.
Can Fasd be genetic, and can it be transferred to children?
Very, very good question. Yes, that's very interesting. But no, I do know for a fact the only if a individual, and I do know personally a woman that had Fasd, and she had a child. Now, she did not consume alcohol during her pregnancy, but she had a child. And as I say, that child, no way could that child have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder because there is no alcohol consumed during the pregnancy. But in saying that, because the mother had Fasd, there was some epigenetic changes to the DNA. And so unfortunately the child had Tourette's, which wouldn't have happened prior to that. But no, it can be, it's not passed on. It cannot be passed on. But it is also very, it's something to look at too, that sometimes it can be intergenerational because of the habits of have been passed down from the parents to the child. And so that can happen. But no, it's not something that can be just automatically transferred. It has to be the consumption of alcohol during pregnancy.
Are the main comorbidities of Fasd ASD, ADHD, RAD, CD, and ODD?
Sorry, could you just rephrase the first part of that question?
Yeah. Okay, so what are the main comorbidities of Fasd?
Comorbidity. Look, they overlap. There is so many overlaps there that happen with all of those, and quite often, and it's very, very hard to diagnose. This is where we get a multidisciplinary team to look at those different factors there. Often they can be the same, that you can have an individual that has Fasd and they do have autism, they do have reactive attachment disorder, they do have all of those things. So it is a case of it is very specific to the individual in knowing, and that would be for a health professional or a multidisciplinary team to be able to diagnose and look into that.
Mm-hmm. Do you use the same behavioural and management techniques for Fasd as you would with ADHD or ASD?
Yes, definitely. But the one thing about it is you cannot, it's a very hard one because it's not one fits all sizes. And it is there where sometimes a strategy might work. I will give you an example of that in that I do know one mother that she was going from Melbourne up to Queensland. So it was just a short sort of, couple of hour flight. But her son has a lot of processing problems and also has preservative problems with food. So there's certain things that he can't eat. So on the plane there, and what it is putting in a routine and actually practicing and going through a plan, because going away often can be a nightmare for parents because it's a routine and structure that keeps the glue together. So sometimes going on holidays can be quite a nightmare. And so this mum went through for days, actually a couple of weeks before they were going, putting the plan in place that you can eat this. She had it worked out what she could eat and screen time also what he could watch. So after the plane took off, the steward came along and offered a muesli bar. And of course, he looked at mum and said, "Can I have one?" And she said, "No, remember we agreed." And he said, "Oh," and the steward, thinking he was helpful, said, "Oh, but they're free." And he said, "Oh, Mum, they're free." And she said, "No." And with that, you could tell his voice was starting to then go, "I want a muesli bar," and started to get really angry about it. And Mum said, "Well, no, we're sticking to the plan." And he said, "But I want a muesli bar," and stomped on a toe at the same time. And it was like she could see he was starting to escalate. And she thought, "Oh, my goodness, I need to diffuse this because I'm in the middle of a plane." And to have a meltdown there, you could imagine the poor people in front, the chairs being kicked, the whole outburst there. So she just had to think quickly. And she thought what she did was when he said that, she just turned around and right in his face went, "Meow," and then turned back. And he was, "Oh, what was that?" And then she's turned around. He just said, "I want a muesli bar." So then she turned around and went, "Woof," in his face and just turned back. And he was quite perplexed then. And he sort of said, "I want a muesli bar." You could tell the tone was changing. And she just right in his face did a big moo. And he just lost it. He said, "Mum, you are so embarrassing. How could you? Oh, my goodness, you're such an embarrassment to yourself," and went right through it there. So that diffused it. And so I said to her, "Could you have used that on the way back?" And she said, "No, it'd be too quick. He'd know that, but she could use it further down the track." So what we need to do is put in things in place that sometimes, and be aware, some things work sometimes and not other times. So we just need to change tack sometimes. And even if something might have been working, stops working, then leave it for a while, you might be able to bring it later down the track.
Can you clarify what are the benefits to getting a diagnosis of Fasd compared to ASD or ADHD when supports that can be put in place can be similar?
Yes, they are quite different though. And this is the thing about knowing and understanding that. It's definitely a diagnosis and it doesn't matter what it's for. ADHD actually will not give you any, it is something that the NDIS don't recognise. So you don't get any, if you just had a ADHD diagnosis, you will not get any NDIS support. So that's not classed as same with trauma, because those two things, it is said that they can literally grow out of, can be cured, whereas Fasd is a lifelong. I also do know that I have had individuals, parents come to me and they have had diagnosis of autism and they put in strategies in place and they have said those strategies still don't work. And having the Fasd diagnosis and putting those in has actually made the world of difference. And each time they've had a diagnosis, sometimes you know it's just not quite right, because you may have a diagnosis of, say, ADHD, and you think, okay, yeah, that's great, I've got that under control. And then you think, oh, that's not quite working properly. And then you sort of know, oh, there's still something wrong with my child. And it's not until you go through, and it can take a long journey sometimes getting there, but definitely the right diagnosis will give the right supports that need to happen for your child. And I think one of the major aspects of it too is knowing that you're not dumb and stupid. I've spoken to many adults that have wanted diagnosis just to purely justify the fact that they are not dumb and stupid, that they have a brain impairment, and they actually just think differently to everyone else.
Okay. Does Fasd also cover children that have clear symptoms but in drug abuse instead?
Yes, that's quite often, because this is what happens is they're looking at the secondary issues. So what will happen is that the individual has Fasd, and to sort of self-medicate and make things better, they will go to drug and alcohol. And so that is actually a secondary condition of Fasd, and whereas really the primary aspect of it needs to be looked at in where they where their deficits are. And this is where it's good to have a full multidisciplinary team assess the individual, because you can have a diagnosis of Fasd, as you know, with just 3 severe impairments in 3 domains of the brain. So you don't need to go any further to actually get support and help with that. But to have the full diagnosis then shows where the brain impairments are, and so where the extra supports need to be, and what things are more difficult for that individual because of where the impairments are.
Can memory loss improve later in life?
Not really. Things will improve. What was very interesting, I found a while ago, and this was through the helpline actually, is behaviours improve over time. And definitely with like things like meltdowns, those sort of things. And also when you're looking at the chronological age, when you're looking at, okay, still if a person's 30 years old, they still may be socially and emotionally 15. Sometimes in some aspects, they might not get fully mature, but learning behaviours over the time certainly does. And so they're not melting down as much. They have that. What happened, I do know a little while ago, I was contacted by someone from the Alzheimer's Association, and she was saying there that she had a client that was diagnosed as Fasd and had gone into a dementia, an aged person's home. And her mother, who was 80 years old, this person was 60, and she was getting early onset dementia. And her mother was in there, and some of the behaviours she was doing and some of the meltdowns she was doing, her mother said she hadn't seen since she was a child. So you can see there that the behaviours do get better over the time, but unfortunately with memory, there are some that it's a lifelong thing. So we need to put strategies in place. It is like they will eventually know how to get changed. So those sort of things, when they're children growing up, they'll eventually learn, yes, I do need to take my pajamas off before I put my clothes on, and how to put my clothes on. Those sort of things will eventually happen. They might be a lot later in happening, but they will be happening. But things like short-term memory, unfortunately, does not improve. We need to make sure that they have supports there to help with that.
Can you have all the features and developmental delays of Fasd with no alcohol consumption, and the mother is denying drinking?
Yeah, no, unfortunately not. And unfortunately, that's a very, very, if there's the 3 sentinel facial features, the 3 sentinel facial features, alcohol is the only substance that confirms those 3 sentinel facial features. There are some other features as well that people might be aware of, like a flat face or a button nose, hockey stick finger where the little finger doesn't go out flat, railway ears, but we only use the 3 ones that Bianca went through there as sentinel facial features because they're the only ones that have been proven to be caused when with alcohol consumption. And if there are no facial features and the mother is alive and denies alcohol consumption, even if she has been witnessed, observed having alcohol, unfortunately, there can be no diagnosis of Fasd.
When you mentioned about meltdown, does that include crying?
Yes, yeah, it's used. Crying and meltdown is quite often where they lose the total self-control and will be yelling, screaming, swearing, shouting, kicking, punching, all of that is a full-on meltdown. Not usually just crying. It depends a little bit there. But a meltdown is where they get totally overwhelmed. And often after those meltdowns, the individual can't remember what's happened in that period of time.
Could you clarify the different strategies for Fasd compared to ASD and ADHD?
Look, if you'd like to put in, I will send some information out on that for you. I don't have it in front of me at the moment, but if you'd like to just give Charlene your name or email address, and I will forward that on to you.
Okay. Why is expressive language above physical age when they have a language disability?
Because you learn to talk the talk. So once they've learned to talk, it is a case of, but often they can talk the talk, but do not understand. They do not comprehend what's being said. So they often individuals can be very outgoing, very friendly and want to fit in. So they'll talk with chit chat. But then when you start to have a more in-depth conversation, it is not in-depth. And sometimes individuals will not understand what's being said, but they can have that nice expressive chit-chat language. That, of course, is once they have learned to talk properly. But it is very, very common because to have good expressive language, because everyone, they want to fit in. Individuals with Fasd just want to fit in, be the same as everyone else. So they learn, if I can talk the talk, everyone's doing the talking, and I can talk as well. So this is where the expressive language, although might be good, the comprehension is not necessarily good at all.
Okay. And is there an example of a plan for someone with Fasd?
A plan as far as a NDIS plan or a workday plan, or I'm probably need to be.
No, it just says an example of a plan. It did
plan.
Come in after Nate Sheet's video, so it might be.
Oh, I see, something like that.
Something
yes,
from there,
yep.
yeah.
Yep. No, that's fine. Yes, so we can certainly send out and probably send out with the links. Now, this will go out on Monday, a recording of the webinar, a link to that, and also for any extra information that I can pop in there for you that you will find handy, I am sure. So please just let us know if there's anything else that you would like.
Mm-hmm. Is it possible to have Fasd without all 3 of the sentinel features?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. But we do need to have prenatal alcohol consumption confirmed. So there's probably more individuals with Fasd that have no facial features than ones that do have facial features. I guess the flip side of that too is sometimes an individual can have the facial features, but not a huge brain impairment, just depending, as we saw in the gestation period there, and Bianca was saying that the facial features are only formed on 4 days of the pregnancy, day 17 to day 20. And so if any reason no alcohol was consumed during that time, there won't be any facial features. And the opposite is that if maybe the mother is pregnant and she doesn't know she's pregnant and she has consumed some alcohol, there might be some facial features there. And she also may have stopped as soon as she's found out she's pregnant. So no more brain or no other damage might have occurred in that time, because it's very sensitive to when the alcohol is consumed to what sort of damage could possibly occur. And as I say, that depends a lot on the epigenetics of the child itself to whether that child is susceptible.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have any more questions.
Beautiful. Well, thank you all very much for joining me. It's been lovely to have you here, and I do hope you enjoyed this and got some information out of it. So thank you all very much.